Namaskar. Welcome to the episode on ecological planning. Ecological planning is an urgent necessity considering the vast amount of changes taking place across the globe. It is high time serious initiatives were or are made to sustain and safeguard the bountiful natural resources available to us. To protect and preserve them for posterity, ecological planning is a desiderata. In this episode, let us explain the vital importance of ecological planning. The main objective of learning has been presented under 5 broad categories, and they are as follows. First, principles of ecological planning. Second, initiative on ecology and environment. Third, the Millennium Development Goals. Fourth, national policy on ecology and environment. And fifth, policy statement on environment clearance. Coming to the introduction. For millennia, we have realized the importance of conserving important natural resources and minimizing the damage that their activities cause to the natural environment. There are 2 broad planning strategies to protect environmental resources and reduce or eliminate these impacts. It is to shape land use patterns to protect people against natural hazards. The second is to control emissions or discharges directly. Hence, the practice of ecological planning is as old as the age of civilizations. At the beginning of the 21st century, environmental planning lies at the juncture of 2 major fields of policy formulation and implementation. They are comprehensive growth management and environmental pollution control. Coming to the principles of ecological planning. Comprehensive growth management seeks to advance a broad spectrum of goals and objectives. It protects the various infrastructural systems. At the same time, it seeks to protect critically important natural resources such as farmland, floodplains, marshes, and other areas of critical ecological concern. Decades of contemporary efforts to protect the environment and reduce environmental pollution have confirmed that humanity and the natural environment are interdependent. Changes in the natural environment can cycle back and cause serious harm to mankind. The following suggestions are made for improvements in our environmental planning efforts. Construction of energy environment database. By participative research involving local communities, NGOs, government agencies, and other trustworthy interested groups. To ensure financial and social sustainability or effective financial mechanisms like taxation, subsidies, soft loans, price controls, etc. Encouraging natural regeneration by reducing human impacts, interface forestry and social forestry conservation strategies involving local communities, development of grasslands by controlled grazing and other related items. Sustainable management of desert ecosystems by appropriate water harvesting or reuse technologies. Adopting an integrated approach towards solving energy or environmental problems. Initiatives on ecology and environment. UN Environment Programme was established as the result of the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment held in Stockholm in 1972. Its mission is to provide leadership and encourage partnerships in caring for the environment by enabling nations and people to improve their quality of life without compromising that of future generations. Its major priorities include environmental monitoring, assessment and early warning, promoting environmental activities throughout the United Nations system, raising public awareness on environmental issues, facilitating information exchange on environmentally sound technologies, providing technical, legal and institutional advice to governments. Threats to life. Today, life on Earth continues to face significant threats. At present rates of extinction, nearly 20% of the world's species and 50% of the world's coral reefs are severely threatened. This loss of species and vital ecosystems and the increase in global climate temperature will have serious impact on the natural environment. In turn, human societies will depend on its limited resources. Hence, the United Nations Foundation focused its support to environmental causes in two areas: the sustainable energy, change and conservation of biodiversity. For this purpose, UNEP has been appointed by the Commission on Sustainable Development, CSD. This is the interagency coordinator responsible for implementation of Agenda 21. UNEP programs and units dealing with the issues related to tourism are Division of Environmental Conventions, Division of Environmental Information Assessment and Early Warning, Global Program of Action for the Protection of the Marine Environment for Land-Based Activities, Mediterranean Action Plan, the Caribbean and the East Asia Regional Coordination Units, Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific and other regional offices, UNEP or GEF Coordination Office and the Convention on Biological Diversity. UNEP Tourism Program. The UNEP Tourism Program's mission is to ensure that conservation of the natural, cultural and man-made environment is an integral part of tourism development. The basic strategies are increase tourism industry accountability and support for the environment and for its stewardship. Work with leading companies investing and operating in tourism to create and disseminate best environmental practices and technologies. Support the development of tools for sensitive protected area managers to use sustainable tourism as a source of financing while minimizing negative impacts on the environment. Support the development and dissemination of best practices to optimize tourism impacts on sensitive environments. Build government capacity at all levels to integrate sustainable management of natural resources into public and corporate tourism policies. Promote participatory planning policies for destinations, ensuring inclusion of environment-minded stakeholders. Actively promote the implementation of existing multilateral agreements on sustainable tourism to national and local governments. Encourage development and financing agents to adopt environmental suitability as a prime criterion for project support. Increase awareness of environmental issues in all tourism stakeholders. Build on increased awareness of and sensitivity towards social and environmental issues to change tourism consumption patterns toward more sustainable paths. Now coming to the program framework on biodiversity. The Convention on Biological Diversity, that is CBD, provides an overarching global framework. In addition, most countries have laws that provide at least some structure in this direction. Nature of work support should increase synergy between UN conventions and agreements and strengthen partnerships with NGOs, particularly at the project site level. Projects should emphasize involving indigenous and local communities and demonstrating linkages between conservation and sustainable development. Resources should have a clear value-added benefit. Initiatives should aim for timely and efficient delivery of resources and should be consistent with country priorities and strategies. Conserve biodiversity. Thousands of local communities depend on coral reefs, which provide habitat for a host of commercially valuable marine species, attract tourist dollars, and protect beaches and nearshore areas from the brunt of hurricanes and storm surges. As part of its efforts to conserve biodiversity, the United Nations Foundation has brought together a working coalition, the International Coral Reef Action Network, known as ICRAN. Its goal is to reverse the decline of the world's coral reefs. ICRAN is supporting coral reef management demonstration sites in 4 regions, that is the wider Caribbean, East Africa, East Asia and the South Pacific. These sites are expected to become blueprints for managing threatened coral reefs worldwide, protecting them from overfishing, pollution and unsustainable pressures from coastal populations. Now next, coming to the World Heritage Sites. World Heritage Sites are places of outstanding universal value for whose protection is the duty of the international community as a whole to cooperate. World Heritage Sites face many of the same problems threatening biodiversity around the globe, including habitat loss, invasive species, overexploitation or pollution. Furthermore, the status of these sites has not often translated into national or international assistance for their conservation, and many sites suffer from a lack of resources. The United Nations Foundation has partnered with the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization UNESCO, World Heritage Center, to support and promote the management and conservation of World Heritage Natural Sites. Program Framework on Climate Change. As we enter the 21st century, global climate change has emerged as one of the most significant challenges facing human society. In response, the United Nations has facilitated the development of several critical agreements that provide a framework for international cooperation on this issue. These include 2 major international agreements to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, in 1992 and Kyoto Protocol in 1997. The United Nations Foundation Sustainable Energy and Climate Change Program will primarily focus on the major GHG emitting developing countries, including China, India and Brazil, which account for 50% of GHG emissions in the developing world. Millennium Development Goals. In September 2000, the world's leaders gathered at the United Nations Millennium Summit. The resulting Millennium Declaration, adopted by 189 countries, includes urgent collective commitments to overcome the poverty that still grips most of the world's people. At the 2000 summit, the United Nations General Assembly also asked the United Nations Secretary General to prepare a roadmap for achieving the declaration's commitments. The Millennium Development Goals are benchmarks for progress towards a vision of development, peace and human rights guided by certain fundamental values essential to international relations in the 21st century. These include freedom, equality, solidarity and tolerance. Respect for nature. Prudence must be shown in the management of all living species and natural resources in accordance with the precepts of sustainable development and shared responsibility. next is the national policy on ecology and environment. Ever since human societies have evolved, they have not only altering their environment but also polluting, degrading and depleting their natural resources. The Industrial Revolution and Green Revolution have only added fuel to the fire by accelerating these negative changes. The United Nations Conference on the Human Environment, so-called Stockholm Conference of 1972, set the scene for novel international activities at the global and regional level and also influenced legal and institutional development. During the 1970s, the volume and influence of ecological studies increased. New technologies to investigate the environment were developed. In the 1980s, purely scientific matters began to acquire a political dimension. Regional and global environmental threats became part of the international community agenda as scientific evidence identified the potential consequences of climate change, ozone depletion and loss of biodiversity. Local issues like the forest destruction in the tropics or desertification were recognized to have transboundary or even global consequences for mankind. While the substance of environmental policy formulation is largely dominated by science, political essence is often characterized by the delay between cause and effect. Environmental consequences of economic or social policies do not necessarily affect those persons or generations who enjoy its immediate benefits, and the momentary intangibility has given rise to the call for intergenerational equity and sustainable development. The Indian scenario. Our policymakers have paid only inadequate attention to environmental policy making and implementation before the 1960s. Between 1960 and 1970, there was limited attention on the environmental issues, but there was no integrated approach. This situation changed from 1970 onwards due to the emergence of environmentalism as discussed above. Before 1972, various environmental issues or problems were dealt separately by different ministries of the central government with little coordination between them as they were functioning in isolation. Realizing the urgent need for coordination, the National Committee on Environmental Planning and Coordination, that is NCEPC, was constituted by the Department of Science and Technology, that is DST, Government of India in 1972. It was renamed as National Committee on Environmental Planning NCEP in 1981. Energy and environmental issues or problems are both sides of the same coin. Environmental degradation to a considerable extent in India is due to the fragmented, short-sighted energy environmental policies or planning. Lack of transparency in decision making at all levels for political or personal gains in planning and implementation for new development projects. Next, coming to policy statement on environmental clearance. The Indian experience with environmental impact assessment is just over 2 decades old. Till 1994, environmental clearance from the central government was an administrative requirement for big projects undertaken by the government or public sector undertakings. Initially, during 1978 and 79, EIA for river valley projects were carried out, later extending to industrial projects. The Ministry of Environment and Forests, MOEF, Government of India, under the Environment Protection Act of 1986, promulgated a notification making environmental clearance, that is EC, mandatory for expansion or modernization of any activity or for setting up of new projects. Currently, EIAs are done hurriedly with little or no people participation, often overestimating the benefits and underestimating the cost, especially the social and environmental. Examination of varied developmental proposals. The current system of screening is a categorical process. It means that the requirement of EIA for a developmental activity is based on a list of activities. In addition, the screening criterion also looks at site considerations due to existence of legislative notifications that either regulate or even restrict certain categories of developmental activities within specified locations. The new system also envisages the screening of projects for EIA through an interactive, web-based decision support system in light of the rapid advances happening in India in the field of IT. Focus on decentralization of EC process. All over the world, there is a gradual shift of paradigm in terms of environmental management plans in line with the Think Global, Act Local concept. Post-Rio, the host of global conventions, agreements and norms collectively called the Rio Agreements that have been formulated have a prime focus on implementation at the local level, which is where real environmental action takes place, targeting the man on the street. In India too, decentralization and community-driven management strategies have come to the forefront. This is because of the process of globalization and associated economic reforms. This is also in tune with the thinking of the state governments who are keen to play an increasingly more significant role in environmental decision making. This is to grant environmental clearance to developmental activities or projects to come up at any location within their jurisdiction. The central government is envisaged to play a more crucial role in formulating and crystallizing the strategies, policies and programs for the government. The state governments would, however, be under the close surveillance of the central government to ensure overall environmental performance. Focused environment assessment for effective resource utilization. The proposed system would have a formal scoping exercise. This, which would set appropriate boundaries of the assessment, incorporating relevant project aspects and site sensitivity concerns of the government into the EIA study. It is also proposed to incorporate public concerns in EIA study at the beginning itself by involving people at scoping stage. The current EIA system has in its fold ways of espousing the views of the public through a public hearing. However, critical review of the existing practice and the past performance of such hearing have revealed that such dialogue is not serving the desired purpose. If carried out properly, EIA can play a crucial role in building awareness about the project and its associated environmental and social impacts and gaining agreement on management and technical approaches in order to maximize benefits and reduce negative consequences. Even private sector players in India are gradually coming to realize that effective public consultation enhances the long-term viability of a project. Therefore, the new system for environmental clearance proposes adequate public consultation and disclosure mechanisms. However, critical review of the existing practice and the past performance of such hearing have revealed that such a one-off dialogue is not serving the desired purpose. To conclude that, if carried out properly, EIA can play a crucial role in building awareness about the project and its associated environmental and social impacts, besides gaining agreement on management and technical approaches in order to maximize benefits and reduce negative consequences. Even private sector players in India are gradually coming to realize that effective public consultation by involving affected stakeholders will enhance the long-term viability of a project. Therefore, the new system for environmental clearance proposes adequate public consultation and disclosure mechanisms. Thank you.